So, hi, Inti. I'm
Hey, hi.
Cass. I'm the historian, and we have Austin and Lisa here with us. They're also board members of the OSSIA.
Amazing.
Right. So, can you talk a little bit about yourself? Like, just introduce yourself and your musical background.
Totally. My name is Inti. I'm a composer from Washington, D.C., and my music has to do with kind of group dynamics of improvisation and play, different ways that through sound we're able to kind of create dialogues and explore together. And so much of my music is kind of written for classically trained musicians. There's a process of interpretation of a score, even though that score is kind of a quite variable item depending on what piece it is and who I'm working with and what the circumstances are and kind of what we're trying to achieve. Um, and so yeah, most of my work has to do with this kind of emphasis of the performer and a kind of focus on the creative potential of that performer to make um, decisions and have that affect the music from things that are quite minute to things as kind of large as form, structure, duration, and more.
Great. All right. So what is your relationship regarding to like OSSIA and like what are the projects that we're working on? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Totally. So yeah, I've been a big fan of OSSIA for a long time. I think I first learned about y'all from Alarm Will Sound and from kind of the legacy that Alan Pearson talks about, with Eastman and with this contemporary music group. I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think also like this kind of forming around playing. Is this also around playing Steve Reich's Tehillim? Like back in the day, yeah, I think there's some like cool historical part of it that like kind of put you on my like map, and y'all do like a really cool call for scores every year. So I remember I think applying with that and having maybe a piece selected, or maybe it was select kind of invited back afterward. I can't remember, but yeah, y'all have been kind of engaging me in my music for a couple years, and this year I have the pleasure of writing a new piece for you all. One that's kind of I'm building out to be site specific, to be kind of about the performers, and to have an amount of kind of on the ground time where we're able to kind of manifest and and make something really really cool. And what was so special about this collaboration commission was just uh, kind of the prompt to do whatever I wanted, which is not one that like we normally get that often. Like we're often, like the parameters of instrumentation or program or presentation, presenter or space. Like, all of these things are kind of ways in which, we compromise on things that we might be interested in. And so I've had a lot of fun kind of, going as wild as I can in what I'm imagining, but then also the kind of resources of these like really specific like Xenakis percussion instruments and all these super cool things that just I'm always kind of interested in like what's the most unique thing we can do in this like kind of situation, musical situation, musical meeting, and how can that kind of create something that couldn't be made in another space or another opportunity or even another time. So I'm just really excited about how there's a bit of indulgence here that I am really happy about.
Great. I mean, as a percussionist, I'm very excited for your new piece because it's very percussion heavy. So
Yep.
I'm interested. Like, could you talk a little bit more about your process of composing this piece? And like, do you start with the sound or do you start with the instrumentation or what is your approach?
Yeah, I generally start with sound. I in some ways most of my composing is about kind of looking around to the influences in my life and the other composers in my life who I'm fascinated with and want to, take a gamble on trying to make something in some way or focused in some other kind of space. And so I've had the pleasure of getting to know Sarah Hennies for the last couple years, and just her practice of this kind of really physically intense embodied approach to percussion and to sound, and especially to metal percussion and a lot of this exploration of overtones. I've been inspired by some of that, like from going to her office and like ringing these like mega gongs and like to these these setups of like like 60 tiny little bells. Like I'm just kind of I'm excited for the opportunity to kind of delve into one parameter, which is basically like this is like a sound world that I associate with someone who I feel close to, um, and in some ways like how can I put like the way that I approach making music and organizing sound in time, which is distinct from Sarah's, and in some way like create a broader a broader kind of um engagement with that idea. So like for me that was like the starting point. Was I was like, oh, like in some ways like literally what is the kind of quality of the sound that I'm interested in exploring. um and a lot of the percussion music that I've had the privilege of writing has been really focused on kind of combinations of multiple players striking multiple versions of the same instrument or the same sound. And to me, that feels like a very clear connection with like my writing for strings, which is like also takes advantage of this kind of um, homophonous sound that's capable of this kind of singularity of voice, but also of this multiplicity and of this kind of yeah complexity, but one that makes sense because of its kind of self similarity. um, and so I'm excited for kind of the chance to start to bring those things together. So yeah, trying to kind of focus in on ways in which multiple people kind of engaging the same sound can have different different kinds of saturations, different kinds of ways of interacting in space, and then of course different outcomes depending on where you are in that space.
Cool. So talk about the interaction with space. Do you think more about the movements and like the visual quality of performance when you're like composing, such as like the percussion piece that you wrote, such like the trio, like the minimalistic type of music that
Totally. Well, I think for the trio, that piece is all about kind of interaction. It's built as this kind of series of I think the trio you're talking about is To Give You Form and Breath, which is for
right.
percussion, um, and part of that piece is just about this simple idea of kind of pushing and pulling this constant unit of time, which is this kind of 6/8 bar. And so you're able to kind of like, play 7/8 within 6/8 or play 4/8 within 6/8. And it doesn't even have to be even, like it doesn't have to be like some kind of, some kind of phasing thing or something, like we don't have to like feel it that way. It's just about kind of giving a different kind of conception of the time space of a single cell. Um, but I think for this one, I generally think about really just like the locality of each performer within a space where in an ensemble context, you can just look around for whoever's supposed to cue you, just call it a
Yeah,
day,
yeah.
and just pay attention that way. But in something like that, where in some ways there's you kind of have to decide what is the organizing principle of that space. Is it duration? Is it stopwatches? Is it perception? Um, is it a kind of commitment to a quality of sound that you're continuing in your local space? Um, so just like how, I guess what what perspective and what kind of engagement I'm asking from each performer. Um, is something I've been trying to like play with and kind of add more detail to in my work. So I like the idea of having multiple different kind of overlapping relationships to the sonic space and to time and to duration. That that in some way might cycle, but make it so that it's not just a single like I'm by myself alone in the woods and I'm ringing a bell. It's like I am the bell ring. Like hear ye or something. Like the difference between wanting to be as kind of loud and bombastic as possible with something to as subtle as possible to as blended as possible. Like so. I think for me, I'm just trying to figure out like what the specific relationships I'm asking for are, and in some ways, how those relationships will affect the way in which someone decides to make music within a certain set of parameters. Um, and in some ways, like the more specific I am with that, the more kind of musically, the more kind of musical intention might pop through. Um, Especially like if we're talking about a piece that isn't kind of being constructed around like a cadential logic or a logic of tension and release, but in some ways like I think all kind of perception of art and sound is can be broadly placed in this kind of tension and release kind of idea. But it's is that really local, is that ensemble, is that based on your own positionality or changing place in the space of people performing the music. And so I think I'm in the process of figuring out like what kind of how am I playing with the energy in the space basically. um and what does that mean in terms of audience placement, in terms of performers, in terms of dynamic, all this stuff. So I think to talk to space is that the space is one of those things that like when we are starting to kind of rehearse the piece and see how it actually manifests, it's going to be this kind of like additional player, right? And so if someone has a little bell but they're in like a corner that's super dead, maybe we move them. If there's um like a kind of spatialized edges of the room, maybe then we have someone in the middle, maybe like in what kind of dynamic are we looking for, this kind of interaction, and then through that interaction, how is the music kind of being made? Very long answer.
It's Thank you so much for sharing. I was hoping it would be okay if I could ask a little bit of a follow-up about
Hmm.
some of the things you mentioned about space. So something that I really picked up on about this caring about place and space is like sort of brings me a little bit back about the whole Zoom compression days of 2020 a little bit, and stuff like that. Do
Yeah.
you feel like there is a sort of like freeing sort of connection from like coming out of that and reevaluating the value of space? Um, I was just curious.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. um I mean, from a year and a half of composing in like a tiny apartment in New York, there's definitely a way in which kind of a lot of my work has been kind of identifying what is a variable of music that can change, right? Like if and I think I'm inspired by that, by something like Cage's like Imaginary Landscapes, before piece, this idea of these radios that in their site specificity and through their kind of activation and changing of the dials are kind of giving an impression of this kind of invisible world and invisible space that's around us. But I think I'm my favorite part of listening to music is perceiving it, is hearing it, is feeling it like on my body, and being in a space with others where we are focusing on that sound. Because then by yourself it's kind of nice, like, but you can just be in nature and do that. But so I think space has always been tied to the people in it, to the way in which we feel comfortable engaging that space. Like, I think the moment that we have a giant concert hall like Walt Disney, the concept of spatialization in that particular space is like one that's already going to be defined by the centricity of its stage, right? Or it's going to be, like it's always going to be strange or like at the periphery of whatever we feel like we're supposed to focus on. So I always felt like space is this, yeah, this place where we're able to achieve this kind of focus and collectivity, um, but it's also a space that affects the way in which we play our instruments, the way in which we think about dynamic and blending and placement and all this stuff. Um, and so I felt super disconnected from music making for like the pandemic. Like of course we did. um Everything was kind of through the frame that we're looking at right now, and most of my collaborations with people was like close mic'd, like, mostly strings and pianos and stuff. So there's this like really, there's this kind of false proximity that you get with that kind of setup, where for people's music, um who the space is like an integral part of it, it felt like I wasn't able to get as much from their music. So in some ways it just felt interesting that like the way in which we ourselves focus as composers and as people who explore sound, um we were we were being defined, like by technology that had been created to have a very specific relationship with sound, right? It wasn't a kind of more ambient, roomy kind of vibe, and if it was, then it would sound bad. Um, but like in some ways, like the presence of the space was actually like not a good thing. Like when we're talking about making recordings and doing all this stuff. So you know I got the question super early. I think like one of the first interviews I did about music with Nico Mealy, and he was asking me about my relationship to recordings. And I had to really contend with that during the pandemic because I focused so much on the kind of live performance of it, and really just value the the moment of the spontaneous manifestation of the sound. Like that's what I hold with me and carry with me. Recordings are like yay, but like for a piece like this, like what are we gonna do, like have like 16 mics and like omnidirectional, like there's so much to simulate being live. At some point, like you should just like play the piece again or something. um so I think like space in some ways is this site of exploration that is irreplaceable. Like the sound doesn't, for me, want to exist without that, because otherwise then we're just focusing on the vibrations of a single instrument as close as possible. Like it's about how the various containers and vessels that we're in, like kind of growing outward, are the things that are affecting the simplicity of a unison bell ring, or of a held chord, or of a like all these things that get revealed through time and through repetition in space.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Really inspiring, and we feel very fortunate to be working with you, by the way. Uh, I wanted to ask how you feel personally about the collaboration process as it's been so far, working with us, and what were some of the things you sort of considered? Um, yeah, if you feel comfortable.
Totally. Well, I mean, I think for me, I really value and want to show up for um like contemporary music that's happening in like educational institutions, because it's such a weird like in between. Like I just remember my own place in that, and it was so like I was like, I swear this world exists, just not where I am. And so I think for me, I wanted to approach this and work with folks who are currently in school, because for me, school, institutions and school wasn't a place that I found a lot of clarity around what I wanted to do and what I was interested in exploring. Um, and so for me, the opportunity to collaborate with students not through the purview of professors was a really exciting opportunity. And the collaboration process so far is just like, I mean, honestly, like 2023 was, I think just the last years have been so like catch uppy that like I like have been jotting down notes as I go from like concert to concert and thing to thing, trying to just kind of build out what I want to bring to you. Um, and I think I'm just excited for like I'm excited for the process of putting this all together. Like I'm excited for the collaborative nature of how we're going to, you know, manifest this thing that doesn't actually have like doesn't need to, and I really appreciate this, like necessarily have any like extra like I'm gonna say this, it doesn't have to have any extra value, right? Like it doesn't need this like this kind of, you know, like I'm writing like what am I deciding to write, a string quartet will be played a lot, or this kind of piece will be played a lot, you know, like it gets to just be the thing that it is. That feels very rare, like especially, you know, especially as a as you know mostly a freelance composer, um where I'm being brought the opportunity, and they're like, make something for this group, this amount of time, this whatever, and then I'm like, well, how does it get played again? You know, like it's just all this like extra stuff in our field as like people who are trying to work in music, that I feel like when we're able to collaborate around, you know, the giving the sound or the process or the, you know, the concert itself like this level of like experimentation and flexibility that we just don't really get in organizational or like, you know, more like professional like presentational context. Like it just like makes me really excited for when we're in the space together. um and then otherwise like the conversations that we've had have just been really helpful, like they just make me feel comfortable to explore in that way, where like, you know, I remember like a lot of my pieces from grad school are my favorite pieces, but they were, you know, they were in contexts where I could like fail, and like, you know, pieces still fail but um but in some ways like you have to kind of orient yourself towards not failing when you're you know, like pursuing composition as a career, and you know are trying to eat. um and so like, you know, the collaborative process has made me feel comfortable with the idea that it's about the, like, you know, with us it's about just the space to make an idea happen. And that's just different, it's just different, and it's rare, and it's really appreciated. um
Thank
That's
you so much. Yeah, and I just wanted to say, we really appreciate you giving us your time, because we really want to be involved with about the idea things as students. Cass or Lisa, please feel free to take over and ask some questions.
right. I'm curious, is there like a theme when you compose pieces for like ensemble or like a bigger type of instrumentation? Because I feel like the audience will receive a different type of feeling when you like compose a music with like a smaller instrumentation or like a larger instrumentation. So is there like a theme that you want to point out like throughout your composition, or is there like a common language that you use, or are they all different?
Totally, I mean, I think, you know, part of the I feel like I'm in teaching mode now. I feel like part of the well, part of writing a lot of music is like starting to figure out and identify and try to lean into the themes that are coming out in like your own exploring of things. Um, I was doing a talk yesterday at like University of Florida, which was super fun because I decided to, you know, I normally when I give presentations, most of the music I'll present will be written in like 2020, 2021 kind of thing, because stuff after that, a there's like exclusivity and it's all weird, and like I can only show a certain amount of things for certain orchestra things, which by the way is just turns me off to the whole thing so much. But you know, there's a couple themes that have been you know, throughout like my work, and it's really kind of shifted as I've moved more generally from writing music for people I don't know versus writing music for people I do know. uh, and when writing music for people I don't know, it, it was often a difficult process, but one that was really fun, of trying to imagine some kind of template for improvisation or for choice or for you know, ensemble dynamic ensemble creative stuff, that was very constructed into each piece. So each one felt like it had to have like a take or something on it, or like some kind of experiment on how it would be made, and then how it would be interpreted, and just like the kind of scope of the choice, basically. um and those ranged from things that was like the pieces that were about like unlocking materials as like a set duration of time went on, or it was about five distinct structural points that could be kind of pushed and pulled however an ensemble wanted, in terms of um, you know uh, their position in a kind of 7-minute framework. um, Also, another piece that was about this, getting into more graphic stuff, like pieces that were about bringing together just like kind of abstracted harmonies with things like weather spaces. So like the idea of kind of creating like ensemble textures around the concept and general notion of rain. But rain can be so many things, especially to a percussionist. um, and but the manifestation of those things was the quality that I was interested in. And so those were pieces for people who I could readily explain, this is kind of what we're doing. And folks could like get on board like super quickly, and then kind of become more comfortable with that role. um, with other pieces for ensembles that I do know really well, who are more comfortable asking me questions and annotating, and kind of letting me just use the score as a more creative place, instead of a more instructional place. uh, Other kinds of musics have come out of there. And then there's also this kind of final, more recent path of interest that I've had, which is in kind of, in some ways, like reanimating or revoicing, or playing these original pre-Columbian musical instruments that include vessels that have whistles in them that are activated by water, ocarinas, different kinds of percussion instruments, bells, marble vases that are so resonant when you speak, they they speak with you. Um, so that's been a really lovely focus the last couple of years, since I did a residency at Dunbar Noakes in DC, which is a kind of Harvard affiliated institute that does research in pre-Columbian studies. And I was able to access their collection, play their instruments, and then eventually write this um, piece for Kronos Quartet for their 50th anniversary, which is this year. And that's kind of, that work is continuing to develop. I'm in conversation with a museum in San Francisco about engaging their collection, which is much larger, and there might be some possibility of actually putting some water in these original artifacts. Depending on whoever the curator is, there's a lot of different ideas of, what keeping pieces like that alive means. I think in some ways there's this I think it happens with old violins too, where it's like you actually have to play them for them to be healthy. So there's some debate as to whether these original clay vessels need to be watered to continue. So anyway, that's just to say that's been kind of developing those points of exploration between things that are kind of more about an ensemble that has its own distinct identity and repertoire being able to approach a piece of mine and find their own take on a piece, which I think is just really, really fun for me. I'm always interested in how a different ensemble decides to play this string quartet or this mixed ensemble piece or this open instrumentation piece or something. And then these pieces that are built for collaborators who will play them multiple times, who will tour them, who will, have this other kind of relationship with them. And of course, that is like, I think, what we dream of. And so, that's, I kind of felt like I needed to, like continue to develop these different approaches to composition as the needs of the people changed, of the folks I was working with. because a very kind of open aleatory, or indeterminate approach doesn't always work with folks who are looking for a kind of deeper relationship with what you're seeking. So in some ways, then there's like you get to be more and more and more specific about what quality you're looking for them to play with, um, and how many overlapping concerns you can give people. Like where maybe duration isn't fixed, pitch isn't fixed, timbre isn't fixed, but only one element is fixed, but it's not overwhelming, right? So much of what I'm talking about is not overwhelming performers. um, and so how do you construct a piece or a situation, or you know a set of decisions that doesn't overwhelm people? And you know people's capacity for that is different. And again, some people, some pieces live really well, and some pieces just, maybe I took a left turn and I thought I was big braining it too much, and just it didn't work. So um, it's constantly about this experimentation, though, and uh, a desire to learn what works and doesn't work, and then bring that to the next piece, but not necessarily in some kind of like checklisty way, but just in a like, each time I come back to my computer or my iPad, or my manuscript paper or something, that there's a way in which I'm trying to bend the way in which I'm presenting information and notation.
Yeah, thank you, Inti, for sharing so much. And yeah, there's just a thing I want to bring up is that in 2021 I actually performed in one of your pieces. It's called Form the Fabric. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's more towards the freer kind of piece that you're
Totally.
you're talking about. And I just want to say like I really enjoyed playing it. And that's one of my very first ensemble experience too. And then I just got to explore like so many aspects of music in that one like improvisational piece. And like it really seems like you use like a lot of mediums for music and you explore a lot with bass and like sonic possibilities. So since I think you've like shared so much insights about the specifics, I do have like a more general question
Mm-hmm.
for you. So I just wonder like what does new music mean to you? Like do you have like a definition for it? And maybe can you talk about how special it is for you as a person?
Yeah, yeah, I will. I appreciate this question because I don't actually get asked it that often. I feel like the new music discourses of the past have not necessarily made it to the present, except in this kind of situation. I new music, contemporary music, um, they are different. Although I think I tend towards describing things as just contemporary music. I'm like, um, kind of new music has that kind of bourgeoisie kind of like a little bit more institutionalized version of what a kind of maybe mainstream avant-garde tradition is. But like I don't even like putting those words together just like makes my brain wild. But I have found contemporary or new music to be I mean, just a special place, right? It kind of doesn't exist anywhere else. Like this a way of um, having this kind of. I mean, it's so many things, right? Like we can talk about a concert tradition. The idea of this kind of gathering around a certain kind of quiet, intentional listening, which there's so many there's so many arguments, there's so many things around like the how much that's held up versus other things are pushed down. And for a long time I couldn't understand the functionality of music that you didn't want to dance to or like move to and stuff. And then I think you look closer at the roots of our music, and you kind of realize that like the the ubiquity of the saraband or the minuet trio. You know, like dance is in what it is we study. It's, you know, and so then I would be like, oh, actually, my bigger issue is how this is being taught to me, not necessarily the actual content. But that's just to say, like, I found most of the music that I could relate to was basically like Renaissance and Baroque, you know, Renaissance, Baroque back there, and then kind of 1940 afterward, which is like something I hear a lot actually. Like, it just, like, romantic music I found really difficult to get into as someone who had, like, also didn't grow up with classical music that much. Um, where, you know, for me, contemporary music is this place where we are able to ask a question and, like, use sound to kind of, like, answer it in some way. And, like, that is, like, the cool, like, that is so cool. Like, where else do we get to do that? And, like, where else do we get to, like gather around an object or a process or a series of objects and just, like, see how many ways we can arrange them. Like, it just it it reminds me of, you know, I think I grew up playing a lot of video games. And so I really, like, I love the idea of exploration and pushing against the boundaries of the game or the frame or the parameters or the, you know, whatever. And so, you know, um being able to bring sound into that realm feels like almost exclusively ours, right? Like, it's one where, like, and not out of, like, no one else can do it, but just out of, like, where else is that kind of focus and respect and space given to do that. And so, like, you know, I came to music kind of fairly late, but I did it, you know, in the context of working at a music library and just, like, loving, just like learning a love of different approaches to sound, and that included a lot of contemporary music. It included, you know, and this is the thing, is, like, I don't ever know if minimalism counts as new music. You know, like, there's so many, like, back and forths, and, you know, umbrellas don't fit and all that stuff. Um, but for me, it just started to more generally mean an approach to organizing sound that was allowed to focus on as broad or as specific an idea of that organization without some kind of aesthetic or proper kind of pretext to it, but with a critical ear to it. And it just, like, was it was so joyous to me because it was like I got to be like, I get to make this thing and then I get to talk about it. And I like talking. And I like making things. Um, and I like being in space with other people. And this felt, you know, to me, contemporary music in it and new music in its, like, most joyous form for me personally, and it's not necessarily what I see everywhere, but it's this it's how collaborative what we do is. It's how much it's about conversation, how much it's about listening and picking out, you know, quality or an overtone or a thing, and just wanting to draw a thread to something else. Like, it's about looking for the connectivity of these elements that we all, you know, luckily enough, in some ways share, where, you know, thinking about tuning or fifths or the overtone series, or, you know, like, you know, tones that come out of multiple tones being present at the same time, like, just things that, like we cannot account for it because we're in this imperfect system, and so we get to have the joy of exploring it. And I don't see that as a possibility, like, most other places, unless you have a lot of money or are, like, an amazing, you know, like, international artist or something, or, like, installation. But, you know, like, I just felt like when I was a student that was like, new music and composition was a place where I could bring anything I wanted, and as long as I had folks who I was treating well, they would we could just, like, do stuff, like, and it would just be about the sound, and it didn't have to be within a kind of narrative context, which is like, you know, like theater, musical theater, opera, you know, all these things are kind of about like committing oneself to a direction or to a certain kind of, you know, ex- expression or a certain kind of drama or a certain kind of like uh, way of communicating. And I felt that new music didn't burden itself with it, and I didn't want to be burdened with it. Like I wanted it to be about the sound. I wanted it to be about just the dramatic nature of just looking at someone do something, and like not necessarily know why, not be given all the context, you know, and just look for why are they doing why are they doing that, why is this person ringing a bell for an hour, like I'm, you know, and the like, and as I'm imagining it, there's just this like there's this way in which new music as compared to classical music gives an almost like a point of interest and insight for audience members that goes beyond this kind of like aesthetic or tradition that we like are a part of, and of course like we're talking about this in the context of like so many fights all the time, like it's that, like I can't even look, I can't even read this discourse anymore, but like from the like the prevalence of melody to the the shackles of modernity to the, you know, like I just find these things so amusing, and I don't find any other field that talks about it in quite the ridiculous terms that we do. And so I think in some ways new music also means a lot of people who disagree about the same thing that we're all doing, and everyone thinks that someone else is doing something else, including me. And I find that to be a really like I find it to be a really enjoyable part of what we do, because it's not, you know, it's not just around kind of product, it's also around these like super abstracted ways of giving value or of taking value or of writing this off or of bringing this up, you know, like it, like it's also relatively political, like all of these things. And so it's, you know, I think it's just new music is a way for us to kind of like in the biggest umbrella possible kind of like spar with each other a little bit, but we get to do it in music, like we get to like, and I just find that to be the funniest, I don't know, not funny, I find it to be really really fun, because, you know, like I have friends who work with the most extreme materials, and I would like I could never like, but there are people who work with like the strongest sounds or the like the most saturated kind of thing or the like densest kind of whatever, and I'm like that's so cool, like this is music that I would never make, music that I would never like necessarily like Google, but it's music that I get to like in the context of a program or a performance or a showcase or whatever, just like be in the audience and be like, whoa, this person like lives somewhere else, and like I want to meet this person. And I think that that's like such a cool part of it, is that we also are able to kind of imprint our own interests and sonic obsessions into the kinds of music that we make, and then we get to use that as a way to communicate and relate to other people. uh, and I don't know. I just think that that's cool. Like it's less it's less divisive, I think, because we get to just like, you know, talk about the quality of a sound or a moment or something. And but we're talking about the memory of the moment. Like it, you know, there's no like, you know, looking at a painting and being like that color right there. Like my expertise allows me to identify that. Like, you know, some people have perfect pitch, some people have this, some people have that. But like there's no hierarchy to the way in which we listen and to the way in which we experience music. So I think I gave you a huge overview of this, but I found new music to be a place of like both frustration and possibility, and just like such a intense variety of approaches that I was able to just move in between and pull and push where I felt comfortable. and you know, in some ways, like being a composer who didn't kind of come through a single stream of teachers or people, or like classes, you know, like I have very much tried to construct my own set of things that I'm interested in by studying with the, oh, you know, the people who I'm interested in, and it just like, it feels like sound is this place where we get to bring ourselves, in other places where you feel less comfortable bringing yourself. So you know, maybe there's also some quality to it. um I will just keep going on this topic, by the way. I love contemporary music, and like I'll go off on a whole tangent about rehearsals. I think rehearsals are the coolest thing in the world. um like there's such a space and a quality of like of learning and intention there that I see nowhere else. Like, and so like, yeah, I, you know, and it's about the quality of the sound. It's about bringing these things, you know, it just, it gets to a point where I'm having like conversations with strangers and I'm like, this is not always working. But then you go into a space with people who play instruments and you talk about sound, and then it's really, really like you just like come together, like despite, you know, any kind of difference, any kind of whatever. And of course, you know, I'm sure there's all the things that that doesn't work for. But like I have found that like I can get into a space, and even if someone's like pissy with me, or like they're like, why did you write it this way, or why did you notate it this way, like we can just, if we focus on the sound, everyone's happy, because like someone gets to like show their expertise, someone gets to make something beautiful, someone, I get to show that I was thinking about it because it's placed in context with this other sound. So it just like, it, I think it's a way that you get to build, like new music is a way that you get to build communication with strangers in such a unique and beautiful and kind of like performance oriented way. Because even the site of performance is this place where, you know, when we're talking about choice making or listening or perception, it's a place where all of these decisions get like maximized, because it's like it's about the expression of it. um and again, you know, it just, it, I find this like magic and this alchemy in what we do that I just didn't experience anywhere else, and that's why like new music is so important to me and such a special place that I try and invite others into, um without the kind of like, you know, discourse of things.
We appreciate you so much giving your time. Uh, Lisa and Cass, if you want to ask any final questions, if you have any time left for us, Inti, and also I just again want to state we feel very privileged that you are working with us. And you mentioned something of talking about international or these sound artists with these, you know, to us, you're one of those people, and we want to facilitate that. So we appreciate you. Thank you. Yeah.
Of course, thanks so much, Austin.
Thank you. I think, yeah, like you answer like the most like biggest question of all. So I mean, I don't think there's anything else that I could ask, but probably, I mean, do you guys have anything else?
Well, if everyone's feeling good, I'm sure you're very, very busy, and you know, we don't want to take too much of your time. I think we can call it, and if everyone's comfortable, yeah,
Lisa, did you have something else you wanted to say?
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think like all of my question I could thought of are like already answered. Yeah, thank
Totally.
you for sharing so much. Like, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, feel free to edit anything. There's so much, yeah.
I'm inspired.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we're beyond excited for the concert, for the work, to collaborate. And again, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank
It's
you.
lovely.
Thank
You.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.